Good morning, Vietnam. And here I am, back again. We are going to finish my series, 4-part series, on commenting and dissecting and criticizing Dr. Gabor Maté. If you've watched any of the first 3, you know exactly what they're all about. As I've said, each video is worth watching. There's always something in them that is not mentioned in any of the others. And also, there's about 30% overlap in all the videos. In this particular one, I've included the long preamble introduction of the first one. I'm not going to go through that again, of course. But it's in here if you happen to only watch the 4th one, which is probably the most important one, but I think the first one and the 4th one are definitely the most important. So, I'll say this again, that this particular video came out a short time after his latest book, The Myth of Normal, and he's given a lot of interviews and videos, and he has had quite long discussions with a number of the better and the best interviewers on YouTube, and I watched him on a few of them, and this whole concept theory of normal just baffles me. So I will get straight into it. Again, the introduction is here as the same as in the first one, but at the end of this video, or the written part at least, which I won't discuss, I've included 3 excerpts from the first 3 and what I think are the statements that I think are best that I have made in being critical of those particular videos. So they're at the end of this, and if you want to read more, refresh your memory if you haven't, if you have forgotten the content of the first 3 videos. So this particular video is called "What is the number one cause of addiction?" And it came out only 4 months ago, December 27th last year. So this is his latest, and let's see if he has refined his theory on childhood trauma. We know what his belief is in the cause of addiction, but let's see if he's got any more to say about that. Again, in the transcript, I have tried to repair the grammar to make it readable, lucid, intelligible, and to follow the logic he's trying to convey. As I've said, I've watched, I would say, at least 8 of his videos. So I know exactly what his thoughts are, how he talks, and what he wants to end up conveying. So, he starts off in the interview, "Do you still believe today," sorry, this is the interviewer, "do you still believe today, with everything going on, believe that trauma is one of the main contributing factors to addiction?" This is weird if I break into this. His question is because Dr. Mate said this over 20 years ago. So why he's asking him this question, considering his new book just came out, is baffling. So Dr. Mate starts off, "If I can just begin by talking about what addiction is and ask you a question about it, then the answer to your inquiry will emerge okay. So, addiction is manifested in any behavior that a person finds temporary relief or pleasure and therefore craves, but then suffers, is the main contributing factors to addiction." Again, his grammar's a bit off. "Even though of the negative consequences and his difficulty giving up. He's saying, of course, the difficulty of giving up the addiction of the drugs that the person is taking, despite the negative consequences. So that's what addiction is. Okay, now, so craving pleasure relief in the short term, harm in the long term, inability to give it up now. Notice that in my definition I said nothing about drugs. We've been over this in one of the previous videos, I don't know which one, quite extensively. He's saying exactly the same thing. That's why I'm confused why he's going over all this very old stuff that he has been espousing and is an expert in from well over 25 years ago. And in fact, maybe it's even closer to 30 years. It's at least 25 years ago. So I said behavior could be drugs, of course cocaine, crystal meth, opiates, and so forth. I've been through this. He goes on, the question I always ask people, and I'm going to ask you this now, so you've had your addictions. I don't know your personal history, but I don't need to know what it was. What I'm going to ask you is this not what you're addicted to, but what did it give you in the short term that you wanted? What did you crave about it? Security, numbing pain, escaping gave me peace of mind. Okay, peace of mind. Excuse me, my phone went off. Turn it off. Okay, peace of mind. Security, numbing of pain. Are those good things or bad things in themselves? Innately, they're good. Right? We need these things. Who doesn't want security? Who doesn't want peace of mind? Who doesn't want relief from pain? In other words, the addiction wasn't your primary problem. It wasn't this disease. The addiction was your attempt to solve the problem. Okay. Now I write in response to all that, because as I said, this is 25 years old. I read from my notes. In his book, In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, Dr. Mate gives the example of the returning US soldiers. I've mentioned this already, but I want to make this video complete also as much as possible. During their service, they were smoking marijuana, smoking or snorting cocaine, taking LSD, whatever drugs they could get their hand on, and whatever drugs the army, the CIA, whoever, brought them in so to keep the soldiers happy. On returning back to the States, 95% or higher stopped using those drugs. And as Dr. Mate points out and has said many, many times, and I heard his lecture just soon after the book came out, it is the situation that makes you an addict. It is the stress you are going through, whether it is current or an old trauma. Remove the stressful situation, or if possible, past trauma, and the addiction ceases. That's what I'm saying. So you can have a current stressful situation, you're in the war and you're taking drugs. Once you're out of the war, there's no stress, you feel secure, and so you stop taking the drugs. Except if it's a past trauma, it never goes away. And this is what Dr. Mate is been trying to show us, prove us that he has found the solution to. He goes on, the problem of emotional pain, the problem of lack of peace, the lack of security. Then, if we ask, what is the source of the pain? What is the lack of security all about? Why don't you have peace of mind? We get to trauma. So the fundamental cause of, of all addictions, and I don't care what they are, is always trauma. Well, he's using the word trauma now to also include stress, which you should not do. Yes, it is traumatic being in a war, but personally I think a much better definition is that they're under extreme stress. Of course, some soldiers must find it absolutely traumatic and can only think of the day they get back out of the war zone. What results in us having emotional pain, distress, lack of peace? So, my mantra here, addiction, is not why the addiction, but why the pain, and to understand people's pain, you have to look into their life history. Yes, I'll go on reading his from the transcript I created. Not this idea that you've got this genetic disease, which I've gone over before. He definitely believes it's not genetic, and I agree 100%. Which is complete nonsense, scientific nonsense. Not this idea that you have made some bad choices, because I never met a single person in my medical career or since, before or ever, who chose to be an addict. The question is, why were you in pain? Why did you need to run away from that? And that answer is always rooted in trauma. And I agree. He goes on. I agree with you, and I've often said to people that once you get into recovery, like that's where a lot of the work starts. Because now you have to really look at like why you were using whatever substance or thing in the first place to cope or numb pain, and begin to find healthier coping mechanisms to heal from that. Now, he uses again the word recovery, which we've discussed in the previous videos. And of course, he doesn't espouse on it. He doesn't explain it. He doesn't give beginning, middle, and end to recovery. What does it mean to him, and how has he personally recovered? I write, yes, but the new coping mechanism can be addictive also, like seeing a psychiatrist. I remember Woody Allen wrote about 20 years ago, after seeing a psychologist, whoever, in New York City for like 30 years. And he said, well, I'm basically the same person I was when I started doing this therapy, but I'm a lot poorer. Or drug addicts take methadone. And from what I've read, this drug can also become addictive. And in fact, anytime you replace one behavior or addiction with another, then what you're replacing it with can also be addictive. It can be simple as obesity, rock climbing. He goes on. And then you grow into a better version of yourself. And I write, and how do you do that? Dr. Mate never answers this question, ever. Nothing about, as I said, before, during, and after recovery. Nothing about, he always ends it with saying the word love. You have to love yourself. Well, that is not going to be recovery. That's not going to resolve anything other than you saying to yourself occasionally, wow, I really love myself. Well, that will not cure you of anything. He goes on. If you could explain, I guess, for maybe people listening. Okay, he goes on here. There's no point in reading this about neuroscience. I'll move on. Trauma is a childhood emotional abuse, physical abuse, neglect, and emotionally very unsafe family environment, etc., etc. These situations, these are very wounding experiences for young children. Well, of course they are, because that's what childhood trauma is. He goes on, you can be giving them the basic needs, but not giving them what they need. So children can be wounded by being hurt in the ways that I talked about. Okay, they're wounded, and what needs are you talking about? He goes on. They can also be wounded if the essential needs for human development are not met. Which particular ones are you referring to, Doctor? A lot of families where there's no overt trauma as such, children are still wounded because they're not seen for who they are. Yes, they are still wounded, and it's not because they're not seen for who they are. They can be wounded in a very small way, but depending on the person, and as I've referred to the study done on twins, it depends on the person how they will get wounded and how it will affect their life in the future by the same childhood trauma. But he talks about it like value. The parents are not accepting who you are. He goes on, when there's pressures on them to be different other than the way they are. Well, yes and no. It depends on what is going on at the time. Now, one example I give in other video was that if a boy's been told by his parents all the time, stop acting like a sissy, like a girl, be tough, be a man. Well, that's going to affect him. But how wounded is he? So is that an overt trauma? Well, yes it is. When there's pressure on them to be different other than the way they are. Yes. So the parents in that situation are trying to force a child to become a man when he's 3, 5, 10 years old. I mean, he just wants to act out. Maybe he's hurt. Maybe he fell over. Maybe he's just crying because he's hurt. The last thing you want is your parents telling you to grow up. As I write, this is all very true. A simple example, another example I give here is when a child is doing a drawing and the parents totally disparage him and the drawing, saying that the drawing is very bad, weak, not indicative of anything, and then calling the child an idiot or stupid. They are overt trauma-inducing experiences. He goes on, to be attached to them. Okay, no need to go over that. You can read it if you like. In other words, recreating a fear-based relationship with the child. No child develops properly under conditions of fear. And there's some very famous psychologists who consult parents who separate this whole idea of time out as a toxic practice. I'm not sure. I think timeouts can work. But he goes on, if the punitive time out actually, when a child is really upset, you know what they need. They need time in they need to be held. Yes, but if the child is having a fit and is uncontrollable, and I a couple of times within my own family, around 30 years ago, one of my close family members 2 times was having a fit. He just wouldn't accept something. He was acting out. You couldn't console him. He was just complaining, crying. He's crying and crying and crying. So you need to give him a time out until he can recover himself, get control of himself, and then slowly come back to the reality, and then the parent can talk to him. So then you can hold them, because you can't hold them before that. What is it going to do? It doesn't resolve anything. If the child is acting out, holding them only reinforces that they are in control. He goes on, I'm not saying we put up with kids hitting their siblings. Well, of course not. Who is? I'm not talking about permissive parenting. I'm talking about parenting that's attuned to the child. I remember telling an old friend of mine, I've known this woman for 40 years. When she was single, she got married, she had 2 kids, the kids are grown up, she's a grandmother now. I remember when her first child was quite young, a few years old. And we were talking about parenting and controlling and what to do in certain situations. And I said, if you're going to err in raising your child, at least err on the disciplinary side. because, like that example we just talked about, loving them or holding them in that situation is completely wrong. It doesn't do anything to the child. He just thinks he's in control then. I go on. The healthiest relationship, I believe, is when the parents put their own needs ahead of the children. Healthy, happy parents leads to healthy, happy children. Now, of course, I'm not saying that you lock your kids in a room and then go off on a vacation. I'm saying that if the parents are not happy in their relationship and in their own lives, even individually, then how can they possibly be good parents? I would like to know. He goes on, but essentially, I'm talking about parenting where there's nothing the child can do to threaten their relationship. And every time I punish a child, a 2-year-old doesn't know why they're doing it. They're just doing what they're doing. They don't know intentional. There are no intentional circuits there. Yet, so when we punish them, they don't know why they're punishing them. I mean, it's quite a circuitous route to say that is a child acting to upset you, or is he just acting out in some way? Does he want more attention from you? I postulate he probably wants more attention from you at that time, and he's acting out, and he knows he's going to trigger you. Now, maybe that trigger is intentionally to make you angry. I have seen young children push buttons of their parents. And in fact, when I was taking care of that young girl I mentioned just earlier, one time I took care of her the whole day. She was about 4 years old. She was being very, very naughty in my apartment, my villa, and she was playing around with inside the bathroom with my whatever toothbrush, cosmetics, whatever. And I pulled her aside and was very stern and very angry with her, and told her to quit acting out and to behave. Otherwise, it would be a slap on the bottom. She got the message and stopped acting out. I write, young children all the way to young teenagers, have not developed the psychological capacity to deal with this punishment, logically or without getting hurt emotionally. They need a lot of loving, caring, and explanation after the punishment. He goes on. All we know is that they're not acceptable to us. So it's when the child is most upset that they most need you. Well, it depends on what made them upset in the first place. Are they upset, again, what I've just discussed? Are they upset because they want something, they want an ice cream, so they're getting upset? Or are they upset because they've wet their pants and they need you to change them? He goes on. And they most need your understanding. And there's going to be some people, I think, listening to this, that they're familiar with trauma in the sense of, like, severe things happening to them. Well, wetting your pants and you getting upset at the child to some degree is not traumatic. Why is he lumping every situation into a traumatic event? Whether it is some form of assault, maybe it was a form of violent accident like a death in the family. Well, okay, he goes on, at a young age, like whatever it was, and now they're hearing what you're talking about, they might say, like maybe I have experienced some of this, but maybe they're a bit older and it's been some time since these things happened. What are some signs or symptoms, like in adulthood, that maybe somebody needs to go back and look into some of their trauma and heal from it? Well, here he goes off on how easy it is to go back, recover, resolve your traumatic experiences. But again, he's lumping every situation a child goes through into a traumatic event, and this is absolutely garbage. Unless you're getting beaten every day. I mean, it's a traumatic event every day. But sometimes you are just very, very upset. As I said, maybe you do want to get held sometimes. Maybe you want to change your clothes. You like clean clothes. I mean, you're 8 years old and you want to look good. Who knows? It's very common for adults to recognize that something isn't working and therefore go back and find out what happened here. Well, as I just said, you have to look at the situation. He goes on, that was my case. I was a successful medical doctor. I had children, I was married, I was a respected member of the community, but I wasn't happy. I was depressed and my children were actually afraid of me. Excuse me. And I have to ask myself, what's going on here? Well, what's going on here is that, as we have discussed in the previous 3 videos, you were extremely traumatized, and I don't believe you have overcome it almost at all. And this is one part of your personal therapy. You are now trying to develop all this therapy for you to overcome your trauma. And I hope I remember that at the end of this video. So, I write, so what did you do? Typical of all the people who claim to be able to help you get over childhood trauma. No real answers. Dr. Mate has used his experience in addiction, and we thank him profusely for what he has done to help addicts all over the world and to set up safe injecting houses. From this experience and talking to all his patients, helping them in any way to get off addiction, he did conclude, and I think rightly so, that early sexual abuse is the main cause of heavy drug addiction. I go on. But you cannot use that knowledge and experience to suddenly become an expert on all childhood trauma. There are so many variables he can assume he has answers to. These are some of the questions I have for him, because he has claimed he's such an expert now on all childhood traumas. And I ask him, or I'm saying, did he perform psychological therapy on them? No. Did he do any study on them about childhood trauma outside of drug addiction? No. Are there any random studies he conducted? No. Was there any follow-up studies of the patients that after any treatment he may have given them? No. I'm sorry, Dr. Mate, but your fame and expertise on addiction does not suddenly make you an expert in all childhood trauma. And finally, from him, so trauma, what we have to understand here is that trauma is not what happened to you. That's not what the trauma is. So trauma wasn't that there was neglect or divorce or bullying or abuse. That's not the trauma. That's a traumatic event. The trauma is a wound that you have sustained. I mean, that's just semantics in the end. I mean, the trauma is you getting beaten up by your parent. That's it. You remember it 50 years later. It's still traumatic. It doesn't change the fact that that's the trauma. His theory, this statement that his theory suddenly is that getting beaten up is not traumatic, but it's the wound. Well, the wound is what you remember, the trauma of getting beaten up. So I've written now a few paragraphs on my own comments. That's all from him directly. I go on about how I was very unhappy, and that when I was 24, and I thought the answer was being a vegetarian, strict vegetarian. And after a year, I realized that wasn't the case. I even quit work after working only 2 years as an engineer, looking for the answer to life, why I'm here, why am I so unhappy. And then luckily I became friends with the guy who introduced me to the book, The Primal Scream. So this book connected with me in every possible way and realized that this is the only way for me to resolve my childhood trauma. I think Dr. Mate is more or less saying the same thing, but he does not know how to get to it. He doesn't know how to slow it. He doesn't even do how to become aware of it. In the most simplest form only is that you remember that you have childhood trauma in some way, like getting beaten up by your father especially. When or how it is affecting something in your life, traumatic or non-traumatic pain, how to treat it, overcome it. As I said, I will do my next video on childhood trauma will be all about my own personal experiences on it. I'll read this out because I think it's very important. Dr. Mate is taking advantage of the ability of many podcasters to become influencers. He became famous for his work in Vancouver, lectures and writing books. But now he is taking advantage of the new method of being able to sell yourself, rightly or wrongly, on the internet. His theories on childhood trauma are not new. They have been repackaged for the most part from, I believe, primal therapy. Except his solution on how to resolve it is hocus pocus, to be kind to him. Just like the other influencer, which I quite despise, Dr.Mate, who espouses but has zero credibility on this issue and zero experience, knowledge, education, studied it, is beyond me how he has talked about it. But their solutions are the same. Simply become aware of it, in other words, remembering it, and talking about it. As anybody who knows anything about mental health, this is only the beginning, is remembering it. And if you find someone smart enough, lucky enough to talk about it, that can somehow help you at least get over the short-term remembering of that pain. All the hard work is ahead of that simple remembering. Here in his new theory, it sounds, and his package, that he is the new age guru, what I am terming the new internet gurus. So, now at the end of my deconstruction of his video, I include 2 comments from this video, which I found to be quite interesting. And I'm not going to read them out to you. I hope you read them, because they're exactly a lot of the things I have talked about and am critical of Dr. Mate, and he should read the comments under his videos, because they're actually really, really good and to the point. Even though one of them mentions Jordan Peterson, which I'm not a fan of, but otherwise they're not bad statements of after watching him on this particular video. And then, as I mentioned in the beginning, I've included from part 1, part 2 and part 3 of my earlier videos what I think are critical parts of it, just to reiterate my findings and personal conclusions. So if you only get to watch this one video, you will get it's not a synopsis of my work of the videos 1, 2 and 3, but it gives you a good idea what is in them. So thank you so much for watching me again. I will now do I haven't quite finished my writing up of my personal history on childhood trauma and how I've had to deal with it, how I became aware of it, how I'm still dealing with it today, how it has affected my life, my whole life, since I was very young. So I hope you'll come back and watch that. Thanks so much. Until the next one, cheers.